Well, good morning and welcome to our fifth episode of Arbuckle View Zoom discussions. We have a fun panel today. We have Aubrey Seiler, we have Caleb Whiting, a familiar face to many of you, and Simon Braun, a familiar face as well. So we're kind of excited. This is going to be a fun interaction. And what's going to make it even more fun is Simon is at work right now. He works at, I think it's like a country and western or something like that radio station, and kidding. And he works at, what is it? What's the call letters?
WAUS 90.7 FM, your 24-hour classical connection.
Well done, nice. And so the fun thing with today's feature is that we're going to actually get to listen to Simon in action as we're going through this. So this is going to break it up a little bit, but it'll be fun for you watching at home. And so we actually have that coming up in a few minutes where he's going to actually have to take his first break. We're going to get to hear him do his thing. But in the meantime, I wanted Aubrey, if you would, to share a picture that she took this week. For those of you that were paying attention and weren't living under a rock, we had some wild weather, and Aubrey was able, well, actually, Aubrey, why don't you just share just a second of kind of what happened there out at the farm this week?
Yeah, so this was Wednesday afternoon, and is it Wednesday? Yeah, because today's, Wednesday afternoon, and we were working inside because it had kind of been a little bit stormy, and we get a text from Pac-Man Weather, our private weather service, and saying, hey, there's a chance that we might be having some there's a tornado warning, but there's nothing on the ground, keep aware. And so within about 5 minutes after that text, everyone's in the tornado shelter, and I get the feeling that maybe I could possibly see the tornado from the farm. So we open the door of the shelter, and I poke my head out, and I see the top of this. I couldn't really see it. And so I jump out of the shelter, and I run probably about 100 yards and to where there was a break behind, because you see this one hoop house is a little taller than the others. So got behind it where I could actually see it and snap that picture, and my family was like, get in the shelter, get in the shelter. But I'm glad I got out and got a picture of it, and thankfully it didn't come much closer than that. But that was my first tornado to ever see with my own eyes, so it felt historical.
You're a tornado chaser. You took risk you risked your life for your family to see the picture of the tornado.
And that's how a lot of deaths among millennials and Gen Z happen, right?
That's right. That's great. Cool. Well, that's a fun story, and it just kind of illustrates what's going on in our world right now. We have a coronavirus going on full bore, and now we have tornadoes running around. So it creates a variety of challenges for us. And again, even on a sober note, we were watching last week with Pastor Shires on our conversation, and he was sharing that we're running about 50% off of our tithe for the conference, which is a huge deal. And so it's just a time where there's fascinating things going on, and things that we certainly can make a matter of prayer. Before we get started, we're going to get to pause in just a few seconds. Simon is going to be doing his next spot. And again, this is just a spot between the current song and the next song. And so we'll get to listen to that, and then we'll dive into our programming. Simon will have a little bit of space so we can chat and discuss, and then we'll take another break. So this will be fun. You get to see Simon in action, and we'll pause now to give you a chance, Simon. I don't know where we are, but I think we're pretty close.
I got about 2 minutes left, and
2 minutes.
I'll take this. If you like, I can tell you a little bit about the way this works.
Yeah, I'd love that.
So working in radio is easy. It's a great job. You all should do it. It's fun. Basically, I'll move my camera a little bit to show you. But so what I'm going to do is essentially wait until this piece is done. I've uploaded the playlist of music on this computer for the coming airtime. And so when this piece is done, which is just in about 1 minute, I'll turn on this. Whoops, this is probably making it seasick. This is a microphone that I'll turn on, and it simply broadcasts my voice into everybody who happens to be listening at the moment. And that's basically all I do for about 2 hours every day. It's really actually kind of an easy job. I mean, of course, there are other things we do around here, cataloging and everything like that. But yeah, and on each break, I'll usually try to say something interesting about the piece or about the performer, or either that or I thank someone who donated $1 million to us or something like that. Anyway, so yeah, I got about 20 seconds left. So I'm going to put my headphones on, and if you could refrain from coughing, it would help me keep my job. Music by Igor Stravinsky. That was a performance of his symphony in E-flat major. That was his very first published composition. He wrote it under the tutelage of Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. We heard a performance by Mikhail Platnev and the Russian National Orchestra. This is WAUS 90.7 FM, your 24-hour classical connection. Coming up next, we're going to hear from Johann Sebastian Bach, Keyboard Concerto number 3, key of D minor. This is a performance by pianist Murray Perahia, who both conducts and plays the piano with the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. That's how it works.
Bravo.
And I'll tell you, you make mistakes here all the time. And for example, I just announced the wrong piece. It's Bach's 5th keyboard concerto, not his 3rd. I don't know why I said that. Anyway.
Oh, you're going to get an angry caller.
No, I won't. Nobody will know the difference.
Here, what's your number? I'll call it.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Nicely done. Let's start off with a word of prayer to kind of start off our event. Father, we are thankful to get to do this. It's been kind of a silver lining of this whole COVID-19 deal is that we've been able to do some interesting things that we probably wouldn't have imagined doing. And we have a fun panel on the board today. And I just pray that you guide our conversation, that it'll be a blessing spiritually to the folks that are watching, but also that it'll be a way to a fun way to connect with each other during this remarkable time. So bless our conversation, use it to be uplifting to someone who's watching, and we look forward to seeing how you move. In your name, amen.
Amen.
All right, just as a fun little icebreaker question, I wanted to ask each of you, we're going to start with Simon, and then we'll go around the group. And this is the question: given the choice of anyone in the world, whom would you want as a dinner guest? So I'll ask it one more time to give you a second to collect your thoughts. Given the choice of anyone, and again, I don't know, you guys can determine if it's living or has lived in the world in the past. So given the choice of anyone in the world, live or past, whom would you want as a dinner guest?
Well, I'll pick someone who's living.
Okay.
And I have to pick my idol, one of the people I respect the most, who consistently amazes me with everything he does, and that's composer John Towner Williams. The way he does his craft and his skills with the pen, the baton, the keyboard, and probably a lot of other things I don't know about, are something that consistently impress me, almost as much as his character and disposition impress me. And I would just love to be able to experience that firsthand, I think. I mean, obviously I don't know him, so I don't know for sure, but I would sure like to give it a shot.
That's fun. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. That's a fun one. Caleb, how about you?
That's a tough one, but I would really like to talk to inventor Nikola Tesla. There's a lot of things he did, which to this day no one really knows what was going on there. but he was clearly a genius. So I'd like to understand more of his work.
That's a fun one. That's a good one. Thank you, Caleb. All right, Aubrey, who would, if there was a choice in anyone in the world, who would you want as a dinner guest?
I could probably come up with quite a few names if I gave it enough thought, but I'll pick someone who's living as well. And this has kind of been someone I've thought about a lot lately because she's getting older, and I've wanted to meet her or spend time with her ever since I was really little. That's because I'm a huge Sound of Music fan, and it would be Julie Andrews.
Ah. And why Julie Andrews?
She's the main star in the Sound of Music.
So because you're a fan, because you're a fan of the musical?
Fan of Sound of Music, yeah.
Very cool. Excellent. Well, that's a fun one. Thank you, guys. I just wanted to, find something to get us started in the question and answer vibe. And so we'll go on. I'm trying to figure out, we have 3 minutes. Simon, give me a time check on how we are doing on time before your next break.
Yeah, we've got 3 minutes and 50 seconds or so.
Okay.
This one has to be carefully timed because the NPR news comes in like a train wreck. If you're still talking on the mic, it'll hit you, and that happens, and it's embarrassing.
No, I bet.
We got a few minutes. Why don't you tell us yours?
Oh my, thanks for turning the tables. Let me think.
Welcome, my pleasure.
I would want to talk.
We made it look easy.
Yeah, I know. My brain was elsewhere. I was about to key into a question, so I'm having to shift. I would like to talk to George W. Bush, and here's why. I think I could have probably said any of the presidents. There's something that's so rare about their office. It's such a small club, an exclusive club. But I think I was aware enough going on by that time in my life that his presidency, I was familiar. I mean, obviously there was 9/11, and then there was, the stuff that happened after that during his presidency, that I was aware enough of what was going on that it'd be fun to ask him questions and understand what was really happening behind the scenes, even though I kind of knew what was happening, what you hear in the news or what you hear from the pundits, but what was actually going on from the inner workings of the White House. That would be fascinating, even talk to Barack Obama. Certainly interesting to talk to Donald Trump, but any president, I think, would be interesting to really understand the inner workings of what's really happening compared to what's what you read in the news, and how vast of a difference that would be. That's kind of where my interest level would be.
So like all of the confidential information that they have access to that we don't, that plays into their decisions.
Absolutely. It'd be a classified dinner conversation. There'd be a Secret Service all around, and I might not be able to live after that call, but it'd be certainly a fun dinner conversation. And I'm not a huge political, but I would enjoy just the knowing of the inner workings of what had happened and really what was going on when you heard something completely different. All right. So before we get into our next round of questions, Simon, we'll pause for a second.
Yeah.
Let you do your thing.
Music by Johann Sebastian Bach. That was the keyboard concerto number 5 in F minor. We heard a performance by pianist Marie Pereira, playing with the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. We're broadcasting to you from the John and Dee Dee Howard Studios on the campus of Andrews University. This is WAUS Berrien Springs, South Bend. On the web, it's waus.org. Coming up next, the news from National Public Radio.
Remarks at yesterday's coronavirus task.
Anyway, and that'll be happening for 5 minutes.
Okay.
South Bend. On the web, waus.org.
So there's a delay.
We can hear you twice.
Here.
Double the pleasure, double the fun. Very cool. Okay. Well, I'm going to reverse, and I'm actually going to start with you, Simon, and we're going to, so you don't have the anxiety of wondering if it's right up.
I'm used to timing things accordingly.
I'm going to yeah, I bet you're getting pretty regimented in your life. The first question that I'm going to ask today is a question that's just kind of a very tactical, practical one. And
Sure.
it's, you know, we're all living in a level of uncertainty. Everyone's experiencing it a little differently. But one of the things that, as we've been going through these discussions, that really seems to be a strength for people is, you know, something from maybe the Bible or a passage or a quote that really encourages them or just gives them hope in kind of uncertain times. And so I was going to ask you, what's your favorite Bible promise, passage, or quote that's been bringing you or has brought you the most encouragement, especially when times are uncertain in your life, or there's anxiety, or you just, you know, there's some fear, or, you know, life's a little chaotic. What's something that brings you peace and, you know, encouragement?
Well, I think that obviously I take comfort from the passages that a lot of people will think to and refer to, whether it's Jeremiah 29:11 about the having plans for your prosperity and hope, or if it's from Joshua, you know, to telling him to be strong and courageous. But I like to take a little bit of a different approach, especially when times get tough. My favorite psalm is the one I'll name for the answer to this question. That's Psalm 88, which if you pull it up on your browser or look it up in your Bible or something, the words that it begins with are a little bit arresting. The New King James Version that I remember: "O Lord God of my salvation, I've cried out before you day and night. Let my cry be heard by you. Why aren't you answering me?" And it goes on in this vein of despairing questions for quite some time. And at least within this psalm, within this contemplation, I think it's by Heman Ezrite, who's this is after the captives have come back from Babylon, and obviously they must have been having some struggles. But within the whole psalm, there's no scope of hope from the author. It's all complete despair, which for me gives at least some implication. Of course, there are other passages like this too in the Bible, but there's some indication of, you know, it's okay, or perhaps even encouraged, to cry out in wonder, God, what is this that you're doing? This hurts bad. Why are you letting it happen? And, you know, it's as if God expects or almost wants us to ask these kinds of difficult questions and let him know when we're struggling like this. So I take great comfort in the fact that that's permitted. And, you know, this happens other times too. Of course, not most of Job, but a good portion of it is that way. Reading Ecclesiastes, of course, is a similar experience. And I don't know if that's something that just appeals to my age range or not, but that sort of thing is, and that particular vein is something that I appreciate very much in reading the Bible. And I have to leave it at that because I go on in 30 seconds.
Good, thank you.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations.
You're listening to WAUS 90.7 FM. The time is 6:06. I'm Simon Luke Brown. Thank you for joining me this Friday evening. Currently in Michiana, overcast skies and 45 degrees. Tonight we should see mostly cloudy skies, slight chance of showers here and there, low of 42, and it'll be a high of 57 on Saturday. We should see a slight chance of showers throughout the day, mostly cloudy Saturday night, low of 40 degrees. Sunday will be partly sunny. You're listening to Michiana Classics. Coming up next on our program of music, we're going to hear from Piotr Tchaikovsky, his piano sonata in G major, opus 37, which he entitled the Grand Piano Sonata in G. And sometimes composers like to write on the spur of the moment inspiration. And this was not the case with Tchaikovsky right here. He wrote to his brother about this piece when he was working on it. "I'm working on a sonata for piano, and it does not come easily. I worked unsuccessfully with little progress. I'm having to force myself to work without much enthusiasm. I can't understand why that case should be. I have to squeeze out feeble ideas each bar, but at each bar I hope that inspiration will suddenly strike." We'll hear a performance by the great pianist Sviatoslav Richter. This is music of Tchaikovsky.
and that'll last for forever. So we're good.
Bravo.
That's what happens when you write a sonata without enthusiasm.
You say that's going to go to 5:30? That's a long sonata.
It is. It is. There's a reason this piece isn't played very much anymore.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Simon. That was fun. It was fun to see you in action. We're going to have to let your mom know, because maybe, I don't know if she's ever seen you in action. Maybe not. If not, this is a fun opportunity for Margaret to see.
Yeah. Take your mom to work day.
Mm-hmm. And everyone else too. So that's even better. How about, Caleb, how about you go next? When it comes to thinking of a Bible promise, or maybe as a passage, or maybe a quote in some, book that's really been meaningful to you, what is again, what's an example for you that really brings you that kind of that sense that Simon experienced, where there's, comfort when there's distress or challenge or turmoil in your life?
Well, one verse that's very meaningful to me is 2 Corinthians 4, verses 6 and 7. And it talks about, I'll just read verse 7. No, I'll read it. It says, "For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of God's glory in the face of Jesus Christ. Now we have this treasure in clay jars, so that this extraordinary power may be from God and not from us." And the metaphor I see there is, imagine if you put a very bright light in a clay jar. You wouldn't see anything in a dark room unless there were cracks in the clay jar, and it would start shining out. And so I like to remember that my weaknesses and the areas in which I make mistakes are God's opportunity to show his power. Because if he was intended to do this right, he wouldn't work through humanity in the first place. And so I tend to be a very self-conscious type. And so what I've done wrong or what I could have done better is a big struggle for me. And remembering that God's big enough to deal with it is very encouraging.
That's awesome. Thank you, Caleb. That's deep, and the whole idea that God can shine through our brokenness. That's pretty awesome to think about. And as you look back at all the Bible characters that we looked at, they're all broken. So it's encouragement for us too. Thank you for sharing that. Aubrey, how about you? What's a passage or a Bible story or promise that really means a lot to you?
So I had kind of planned in my head that we were working the other direction on these questions. And so the Bible passage that I had selected won't make sense so much working in reverse. So I'm going to, on the fly, pivot to a different one that can kind of stand alone. And that is the theme verse that we actually have chosen for GYC this year, which is in the same book that Caleb just shared for, 2 Corinthians 5, and it's verses 14 and 15. And it says this: "For the love of Christ compels us, because we judge thus, that if one died for all, then all died, and he died for all, that those who live should live no longer for themselves, but for him who died for them and rose again." And there's something empowering about not living for yourself, and freeing, especially in circumstances that are uncertain. Oftentimes I find that when I'm stressing out in certain circumstances, it's because I'm primarily concerned about myself. But when you're living for someone beside yourself, and that someone being Christ, then that tends to take a lot of the punch out of uncertainty. So.
Excellent. Well, I'm sorry for goofing you up, and what we'll do is we'll come back when we're closing. You'll get to share what you were going to share, because then it'll make sense. All right, let's go on to our next question. So we'll start with you, Simon, since we have time. What's a song or a hymn? Again, this will mean, this could go on for the next 3 hours now. That is especially meaningful to you, and why do the lyrics have meaning for you?
Well, I think that I'll pick my favorite number from the SDA hymnal, which is number 157. And this is the Go to Dark Gethsemane. The tune is by Richard Redhead, I think. Can't remember the author of the words. Let me have it here on my browser. James Montgomery, that's right, an English minister. The text is, to me, a fine example of how I think a lot of the times the depth of meaning in traditional hymnistic poetry is missed when you sing it through in a congregational setting and are thinking about how out of key the person next to you is singing or something, things like that. We tend to miss it. So sometimes I've taken to reading a few texts as, more like reading them as a devotional or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And this text has so many layers of meaning to me. The first verse goes like this. Go to dark Gethsemane, ye that feel the tempter's power. So already we have who it's addressed to.
Mm-hmm.
One who is tempted, which is something that's very applicable to anybody. So if you are tempted, go to dark Gethsemane, you that feel the tempter's power. In your mind's eye, picture the garden. You feel the tempter's power. Your Redeemer's conflict see, watch with him one bitter hour. Turn not from his griefs away. Learn of Jesus Christ today. So if you, in your mind, imagine the pain that the Christ was going through to pay for all the things that you're tempted to do wrong, this might serve as a little bit of encouragement. And then you may not want to see that in your mind, but do not turn away. Look at his griefs. And then it goes on. See him in the judgment hall, beaten, bound, reviled, arrayed. See him meekly bearing all. Love to man his soul sustained. Shun not suffering, shame, or loss. Learn of Christ to bear the cross. So in your mind's eye, continue to picture at the judgment hall of Pontius Pilatus. You'll see, if you imagine all of the abuse and torture that Jesus was going through. And the question comes, how was he able to take that? And the text says, love to man, his soul sustained. He endured all of this hardship simply because of his love for humanity. And how much more hardship can we endure if we think of it as in love to others? Aubrey's not far off from what you were saying. And so in conclusion of that verse, shun not suffering, shame, or loss. So, we tend to avoid suffering whenever we can. Maybe that's not necessarily the best course of action. Learn of Christ as he did to bear a cross. And then the final verse in the SDA hymnal, Calvary's mournful mountain climb. There adoring at his feet, mark that miracle of time, God's own sacrifice complete. It is finished, hear him cry. Learn of Jesus Christ to die. A little depressing, but puts things in perspective and may well serve as an antidote for temptation to do anything wrong.
Wow, thank you, Simon. That's a good one. And just the notion of using the hymnal as a devotional, you probably would experience lyrics that we've never really paid attention to just if we did that. That's a great tip for all of us, especially. But thank you for sharing that. I had never heard that one, so that's a new one. Thank you. I should have guessed it. That you do one that I had never heard of. All right, Caleb, you're up. How about you? What's a hymn or a song that means? What's the meaning behind the lyrics for you?
Sorry about that. The song Leaning on the Everlasting Arms is really meaningful for me because it captures an ideal that I aspire to, which is to not carry the burdens and the stress myself. I have this idea that if I could learn to give my problems to God, then I would not need to feel stressed. But it's one thing to know it in your head, another thing to know it in your heart. And that's where all the emotion and the stressful feelings are. So I aspire to someday have enough of a habit that it changes my emotional level reaction as well as just what I know in my head.
That's great. No, that's a good song. And yeah, there's probably a whole host of lyrics within that story of leaning all your weight on him instead of, trying to carry it your own. Thanks for sharing that. Aubrey, what about you?
So when I was thinking about this question, it was interesting how many hymns came to my mind, the tune only. Like, I have a lot of favorite tunes, but you were asking for lyrics. So then I was like, lyrics. Okay, thinking about lyrics. So then I just let my mind kind of rest and think, what are the lyrics that most frequently come to my head from the hymnal? And there one particular one, which is actually from a Christmas hymn, Angels from the Realms of Glory. And there's a verse in that hymn that says, sages, leave your contemplations, brighter visions beam afar. Seek the great desire of nations, ye have seen his natal star. And to me, and maybe this is because I just like to spend a lot of time thinking about things, my contemplations, like I tend to contemplate a lot. And so it's a good reminder for me to kind of lift my eyes from my own contemplations and seek the great desire of nations. It's that's what the wise men were doing, right? And yet, I not that I classify myself as a wise man, but that idea of, don't be so absorbed in your own kind of thinking and your own understanding, but lift your eyes up and beyond and focus on. And that I love that word, that term, the desire of nations. We kind of maybe are familiar with it as like the desire of ages, which is similar, but there's something about, that every nation desires it, at their kind of core, the salvation that Christ can bring, right? And it's so much bigger and broader and better than anything that we can contemplate up in our own heads. So that's what came to my mind first.
That's excellent. No,
I live on a university campus with like academics around, and I cannot tell you how many times I wanted to say, sages, leave your contemplation. Because class is over and I have to go.
Yep.
I was wondering what something sparked when she was talking that you lit up. So I was curious what that was. So that's you're living in a valley of sages, huh?
Yeah. We could probably apply that to youth class discussions too.
Oh, well. A lot of places are good plan.
That's a good one though, and it's cool to think about. We're all seeking something that we don't realize always what we're seeking, but we're trying to fill that hole. And even those nations that have no clue what they're seeking, fill that hole with. It's ultimately they're seeking after God. They just don't realize it yet. That's a cool one. Thank you, Aubrey. All right, so now let's do a quick time check, Simon. We're 10 minutes out. It looks like 9 minutes out.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so we're gonna go with you next. So you don't have to think about the time coming up. Share a time when you were facing a situation that was challenging for you, and it wasn't just challenging, but it challenged your trust in God. And as you look back, how do you remember, or how did you see the Lord showing up for you during that time in your life?
Yeah, this is a hard one for me to answer because I feel like I'm too young to have experienced a lot of it. And my answer may be a little bit cockeyed. Honestly, I feel like I'm going through that right now, and I'll tell you why. I knew this, of course, before COVID-19 hit, but the life of an artist and musician is usually, unless you're of the top 0.5%, not that lucrative or stable a career. And yet it's the one I want to pursue. And especially now when everybody's losing their jobs, but artists in particular are hit very hard. Performing arts are always the first thing to go, not always, but one of the first things to go in crisis. And many times I have said, God, if you want me to change trajectory, tell me. And could you make me want to change trajectory? And I mean, as of now, I've received no indication. And in fact, I think the way I'll answer looking back is as I look back on the pivotal events in my life now and what I've experienced currently, I have every indication from God to say, no, keep going the way you're going. I've been with you before. Why would I leave you? I've told you before. Why would I leave you? And so I have to trust that. And I may go kicking and screaming, but I have to trust that in the future, as he has been in the past, with sending me to various institutions, teachers, places for me to learn things and skills. I see his hand involved in that, and I have to trust that it will continue. So sorry, Dad, if you're watching this, I don't think I'm going to be able to become an accountant.
This is great. No, that's good, Simon. And you can't corner man, and you'd love to know what's around the corner, but if you can trust him like he's gotten you this far, you can trust him with the next, even though you can't see. That's an awesome place to be.
Usually
that you're asking him, giving him permission to adjust your path, and he'll do that if you're giving him the door to do that.
Seems like he'll do it even if you don't have permission.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things about this whole COVID-19 situation is that it has calibrated our perspective on what is a stable career, because at least I've grown up always hearing, go into the medical field, you'll always need medical people, right? And I have more friends right now that are in the medical field that are either out of a job or severely cut back hours because no one's going to the hospital and they're having to, so it's just like, it's just kind of calibrating the food industry or the toilet paper industry or Zoom. And it's like, what? We never would have thought of that, really. So it's just kind of, to me, if anything, it's this interesting exercise for all of us to rethink what we always assumed to be the case, and maybe not to put such an emphasis on what is a stable career, because we probably don't really know.
Wait, so your friends in the medical field are out of jobs?
Yep.
How?
Because there's nobody in the hospitals.
I thought they were crammed.
Well, there's some hospitals, like in New York. I think there's some hospitals maybe in Southern California, maybe some in Texas. But like I have friends in Florida, friends in Idaho, and there's like nobody in the hospital because everyone's afraid to come to the hospital, and they have no COVID patients or maybe one COVID patient. So you have this entire infrastructure with all of these employees, and you have no patients, and hospitals don't make money unless they're, really cycling through their beds. So they're just like on either reduced hours. I have one friend she works Sundays only now, and that's only like some hours on Sunday. It's just like really crazy. So
it's a reminder, we like to think, at least I do, that I'm in control a lot more than I really am. And this type of a situation really brings that into bold relief, how, stability, what is that? I mean, there's so many things that are completely upended that seemed like, too big to fail. We heard about that, 2008, but boy, yeah, it's a challenging, but that's a good, thank you for sharing that. Let's do a quick time check. Looks like you have a couple minutes before you go to the break, right?
I've got about 8 minutes.
Okay, good. Well, let's move on. So let's have Let's have Caleb go next. Caleb, what, as you think about a time when you were facing a situation that challenged your trust in God, whether it was recent or it was a while back, how did you see the Lord show up in that time?
Okay, so the story I have to tell happened about 3.5 years ago, and I was invited to come work at a Adventist supporting media ministry, and they took interns and taught people how to do media ministry, and they wanted me to teach the web development part. And on paper it sounded really nice, but I think when I got there I ran into a lot of problems, and in hindsight I can certainly see lots of areas in which I failed, could have done better to deal with the situation. And I also see things that I felt like the people in charge could have done to make it better. But at any rate, what happened was a very difficult time for me. I was frustrated because I felt like I was forced to do low quality work, and I was very depressed because I wanted to leave, but I didn't know if I could. I didn't know what's the right thing to do here. I was supposed to be there for a year. I don't want to leave after hardly 3 months. And what if I'm running away from the challenge, and this is what God's given me and it's going to get better? And, did or didn't God lead me when I decided to come here, and prayed so much about it? And so I prayed a lot about what to do, and thought and did my best to process it. And my attention was drawn to James 1:5, which says, I got it here. Now, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith without doubting. And I realized that this was a promise to claim. It wasn't some kind of condition that I was supposed to wait for. This was a promise to claim, and I needed to believe that God would give me wisdom, even if I didn't necessarily feel suddenly wise or like a voice had spoken from heaven. So I gave myself some more time to think about it, and I made the best decision I could, which was to leave. And I left just short of 3 months. And in hindsight, I think it was the right decision, but I'm glad I went because I learned a lot about knowing God's will. And after that, when I've come to difficult situations, I have applied that same rule. I pray and tell God that you've promised me wisdom. I need it right now. And rarely do I feel like I have a good grasp of the situation when I'm making the decision. That's the definition of it being a difficult decision. And rarely do I feel any change in that. But I, over and over again, have seen like, wow, that actually worked out better than I could have planned for reasons that were completely beyond my view at the time. But later on, it becomes clear that it was the right thing to do. So that's my story.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a reminder that God wants to have a conversation with us throughout our days. And when we run into dilemmas like that, we can bring that straight to him. The faster we go to him, the faster. It doesn't mean we'll come necessarily, but we can have confidence that he'll lead us. And that's a neat reminder of that. Thank you, Caleb. I know you might have to go. If you do, just shut down your feed, and I understand you might have a hard stop, but thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Aubrey, how about you?
Well, unfortunately, I do have to go. It's been great spending time with you. We have a radio program that we have to start, believe it or not.
trend.
Theme
It's
for this
actually,
evening, yeah.
it's actually a program on Facebook Live. But anyway, God bless you. I'm really bummed I'm missing out, but have a good evening.
Thanks, Caleb.
Be careful.
All right, Aubrey, how about you? What's this
What's the
time?
4 minutes left.
4 minutes left. Okay. So let's see. I think my experience is gonna not so much be a decision that I've had to make and struggled to see God's leading, but more of struggling to find God in a situation that didn't make sense, which is a challenge of its own genre as well. And it's probably one of the most memorable moments that I can remember happening in my life, where maybe one of the things that kind of transitioned me from childhood into the more gray and fuzzy world of adulthood. And that was actually, I was 12 years old, and it was around Thanksgiving time, and we got a call that my aunt and uncle's best friends, which we knew fairly well, had been in a very bad car accident. They were on their way to Colorado to spend time with her dad. They were hit a patch of black ice and careened into an oncoming 18-wheeler, and it was a bad situation. And the mother of the family was killed at the site, and the father was airlifted to Amarillo with really serious injuries. And the two boys, one was 12 and one was 10, so they were Alan and Maya's age, they were fine, just a couple scrapes. I think one had a bit of a concussion. And I had grown up knowing this family fairly well, because whenever we'd go to Arkansas to visit my aunt and uncle, they would come over, and they were kind of like part of our family gatherings and that sort of thing. So it was a really big kind of shock for us. The first death kind of in my family that I could remember. And we prayed. The father was a leader in their local church, and there's all of these reasons that in my 12-year-old mind seemed to make sense that God would perform a miracle on his behalf and he would get better. He had 2 kids to take care of and all this kind of stuff, and he ended up passing away after, I think it was like 3 or 4 days. And to me, that was really challenging to understand how God fit into that, and how that anything good could come of that decision. Because after all, we serve a God who can do miracles, right? So that seemed like the logical choice in this situation, but there was no miracle. And that kind of put me adrift for a very long time in my spiritual life, because I wasn't sure if I wanted a whole lot to do with a God that seemed to be so out of touch with the best option, at least in my brain. And as I look back on it now and had to deal with that thought now, I was actually watching a show the other day in which the character in the show had encountered a similar tragic event, and she's questioning where God fit into it. And the response that she got from the person she was talking to was that God is not in the event, but in the response to the event, in the love and the care that is shown. And to me, that was kind of an eye-opening type of moment, because it's like, I can look back and I can see all the love and care that was shown in that. And if I focused on that, then I could see how God was tremendously, involved in that, because we rallied together as a family, the churches rallied. I mean, it was just this, there was a lot of really beautiful things, but when you focus on the event and how God fits into it, oftentimes it can be really challenging to understand that. And I don't know that it would ever make sense. So that's kind of one story that came to my mind when I thought of is oftentimes maybe it's changing our perspective of where God is in the event and maybe how he responds to the event, not so much how he's leading in that, if that makes sense.
Go on air.
Music by Piotr Tchaikovsky. That was a performance of his Grand Piano Sonata in G major, opus number 37, written in 1878. You're listening to 90.7 FM, your 24-hour classical connection. Support for this program is provided by WAUS members and by Heritage Chapel in Berrien Springs, Michigan, a Starks family funeral home offering memorial services, funeral services, assistance in making arrangements, and more. Heritage Chapel is located at 8747 US 31 in Berrien Springs. Information can be found online or by calling 269-471-2700. Thank you for joining me for this hour of Michiana Classics. Currently, the time is 6:38, and coming up next, we'll hear a little bit of music by Frédéric Chopin. This will be from his Nocturne number 8 in the key of D-flat major.
Okay, and I got about 6 minutes.
Thank you, Simon. That's so cool.
All right.
Aubrey, as I was thinking about that, there was I don't know, Phil Vischer, he was the director of VeggieTales, and he shared about how his business came crumbling down, and he said, God seemed like he was watching from a distance, and he was watching as I tripped and fell down the stairs, and he didn't lift a finger to help. And that just struck me as how can we serve a God, and how can we trust a God that would let us trip down the stairs and not lift a finger to help? And but yet you found that it was not in the event, but in the response that surrounded and enveloped the event where God showed up. And wow, thank you for sharing that. That's as you look back at it, has it become clearer the further distant time has passed, where it's been something that you've been able to see God's fingerprints in the situation, whereas even when you were near it, it was really difficult to see that?
No, and that's probably what makes it even more frustrating. And I don't know if, as humans, we know that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord. But it can be really challenging. That promise can be really challenging to cling to when perhaps you don't see how the good comes out of it in your lifetime. Yeah. It's trusting that, okay, well, it may never be answered in my lifetime. And in fact, things kind of went from bad to worse after that happened in the story of the remaining family's life. And it's just like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, there should be good coming out of it. It's been 13, 14, whatever. I can't do math on the fly, but it's been a while, right? And the good hasn't happened, at least not visibly. And so that's probably what makes it even harder, because you're like, okay, well, there's got to be a reason for God allowing this to happen, that it makes it, something good comes from it. And it hasn't in a tangible, visual, measurable way. But that could be that, we're focused on the wrong perspective of the picture, right? And so perhaps one of the ways that God leads in circumstances, or is a matter of helping change our perspective on it, and not necessarily changing the circumstance. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of been where I'm at here all these years later, just kind of like, this doesn't make sense, and I don't see where God fits into it. And it's like, well, maybe it's a matter of changing me and how I see things. And that's not, it's like, I'd rather God change, but, okay. So, yeah.
I think all can be challenged by that. I guess that's why it's called trust, maybe, is if trust was easy, we'd all trust, but it's not.
Nope.
And so that's why the Bible is filled with reminders to trust, even though when it's maybe not easy to trust. So thank you for sharing that. So we're getting ready to close. I wanted to give you an opportunity, if you thought it was a good segue, to share the Bible passage that you originally were thinking of before I so rudely revamped things. Is it a good fit?
Sure. It's not quite the same fit, but I think it's still appropriate. So it's Revelation 21 and verse 5. And it says, "Then he who sat on the throne said, 'Behold, I make all things new.' And he said to me, 'Write, for these words are true and faithful.'"
They're true. The promises of all those faithful and trust-filled promises are true, even though they don't always come true the way we think, or maybe when we think.
Yep.
Usually they don't.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, both of you, and Caleb earlier. It was fun to hear your reflections. It was fun to hear you at work, Simon. And it was fun to just kind of experience your answers to those questions. I was thinking, as we finish up, we'll finish up with prayer. And Simon, I was going to ask you if you would have prayer, and then we'll end with the Lord's Prayer. Our theme for a while now has been prayer, and we have a nice outtake with the Lord's Prayer. And so, Simon, if you would finish up with prayer, and then we'll finish with the Lord's Prayer.
Our Father in heaven, we are confronted with many uncertainties in our lives continually, and now is no exception. And there are many things that we do not understand. In fact, I think perhaps most things we don't understand. But it is our prayer with all of our hearts that our faith for you will be greater than all of that, and that you will not desert us as you have promised to be with us. Please guide us and be patient with us in our struggles, and let our faith grow so that we may not be afraid. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, and have a happy Sabbath.